Okay, welcome everybody to one of our spinal hygiene foundational courses on foam rolling. I'm Dr. Kristen Zawada, and you are joining our Monarch Family Chiropractic family on Zoom and in office today. So we're going to jump right into it because I appreciate your patience with the technology on my end. So we're going to talk about some reasons to foam roll. We're going to talk about the rules of foam rolling, and then we're going to get right into doing some foam rolling. You're going to watch me do some motions of three main postural muscle areas that we talk about in here with you all the time while you're under care. But it really goes well with all the components of your physical activity, adding in anything in your self-care like massage and even PT type exercises for stabilization. So this is going to support those components, and it helps bridge the gap a lot of times between massage therapy or maybe PT exercises and other regular exercise you're doing, and adjustments beyond just stretching. So let's get right into it. And I'm going to try to get my mouse to cooperate here. So when we talk about foam rolling, it really has to do with tension and the integrity of that in your fascia and understanding what that is in your body. So we're going to cover a little bit of the what is, and then we'll get to the how-tos. Your fascia is a mesh-like layer, and it's a different type of tissue. So it's connective tissue, and I think of it like a spider web. So it encompasses and interweaves with musculature, but is different and is not a muscle. So you have groups of muscles, you have all your groups of organ systems and vessels, and then nerve fibers and bone, and it's doing a lot of weaving between those things. So think of it like shrink wrap, or like I said, a spider web, because it's tensile fibers that pulling on one affects something at the other end. So I always think of that spider web, but I think Doc explains it really well when she says, think about like shrink wrap. It's around your entire internal structure, sort of like second skin. So it talks about like, we don't have 600 muscles, but a single muscle in 600 fascial pockets. So looking at how we are addressing fascia is different than muscle. So it's very sensitive, it's very dynamic, it's allowing for a lot of movement, but it does different adapting. So it's got 10 times as many nerve endings actually in your fascia than you have in your muscles, which is very, very, very different than what most people think, because we think about vasculature and things in the muscles and think that then there's more nerve endings and signaling there. Where a lot of the sensitivity comes in is because the fascia has more of those nerve endings. So we see a lot of fascia adhesions and shifts when there's been compensation, and it can be trauma, but a lot of times it's micro trauma. It doesn't have to be a whiplash injury or an accident or something traumatic that way. Micro trauma would really be like our day-to-day, like sitting, or a lot of standing, or a lot of repetitive motion. So our body really adapts, and that fascia happens, or when we compensate, we're doing it to, either there's a limitation somewhere, like a muscle, a joint, where this fascia, there's pain. So we're trying to avoid moving a certain way that creates pain. Or there's been a way that you're trying to change posture or have poor posture, and you're doing compensation movements. And so your body is adapting to each either trauma or micro trauma it's had. Right? So there's layers of things, like we talk about our bodies like an onion. Our nervous system and musculature and fascia is like the layers of that onion. And we really have to work at working those things out in those layers. But when they build on top of each other, that takes time. And so our body and our fascia and the compensation happens until it just runs out of ability to compensate, right? So when we're talking about stretching or tightening kind of that interconnected web or fascia, it's happened usually because of multitude of things that we've done over time. So when we talk about where and the whys of foam rolling, it is really how it relates to what we do with your spinal hygiene and the connection to the brain is that signaling, right? So improving a neuromuscular pattern, a signal that's going from brain to the rest of your body. And it's doing that neurologically, but through things like posture, your alignment, your balance, right? Where you feel like you are in space. So we also foam roll to address specific trigger points that are really uncomfortable. And the goal is to increase movement and range of motion and flexibility. But movement and fascia is very different than movement and muscle. So that's where someone can stretch and say, well, it doesn't change anything or get any better. Maybe it doesn't get any worse, but things don't get, my movement's not getting any better. And we have to break up the fascia adhesions. So again, reasons to roll for relief or restriction, really supporting what you do in here and using it as a self-care tool for home regimen and things you can be doing in between adjustments, in between workouts, and in between massages, things like that. So we're going to briefly talk about the rules, and then we're going to get right into the big muscle groups. And again, the other foam rolling spinal hygiene workshop that Doc posted and did, I think in September of last year was the last time we addressed foam rolling. She's going to go through these first 3 that we cover, and then I am going to do a few more so that it feels like it gives you something in addition to do to what you may have already be doing and using with the foam roller. So back to rules though, there is a point to doing the foam rolling through the full range of where the fascia is. So how it's worded here is starting at the origin and moving through the insertion. What we mean is starting where the muscle belly or the fascia attaches to the bone and going through to the other end of it where it attaches to the bone. So most people roll through the middle part where more of the muscle is, and we need to go slowly from the top to the bottom, or we're really missing where those adhesions and those catches, if you will, restrictions in the spider web, in those fibers are happening at. So it's mostly that people will foam roll but not get all of the right areas from top to bottom. So we'll go over that in a second, but that's rule number 1. You want to go slowly through it. I always say it's not necessarily a place you sit on the roller on trigger points for long periods of time ever. You may sit there for a handful of seconds, but it's just a slow, continuous movement. And you're going to find some areas are really tender and other areas may not be tender at all. And you just slowly move through them. If it's a large muscle belly or area where there's multiple muscles, like a glute in our back hips has 3 different muscles. Our quadriceps in our front of our legs have 4 different muscles that overlap each other in different areas. So we're going to break it down if we need to, if it's a bigger group and it's intense for you. Tender trigger spots. I wouldn't hang out longer than 30 to 60 seconds. 90 is a little long to me on an area, especially if it's tender. I would rather you do less holding on a spot and just roll more frequently in your week. Continuing slowly through that muscle is really important until you get to the next spot. Sometimes a lot of it's tender, so we're going to break things up. And again, depending on your activity level, I would rather someone start doing a little often, like 3 to 5 times a week, or say every other day. And then you'll get to when those points are less tender and it doesn't feel like you're doing as much, then I usually, if my intensity of what I'm doing doesn't change, then I just back it down and I may do it once or twice a week. Again, all based on activity level. We always say the intensity of what we do is really dictated by, or how much self-care we do is dictated by how much we are doing, right? So intensity of workouts, intensity of our life really dictates what kind of self-care we need. So foam rolling tools. We are going to go through a typical foam roller, and I would say a medium to firm one is where I would start, and I feel like you get the most out of. The ones that have the little bumps and knobs on them, I would avoid at the beginning if you've never used a foam roller. They are just can be too intense. And you want something that fits you. So we're going to use I like the best a 4-inch diameter. So it's not as wide and broad for somebody rolling over it, whether you're a smaller frame person or a larger frame person, and that it's longer, that it's more of the 3-foot or 36-inch length, because you can then cover more area and do more things on it. The short ones are nice if you need to throw it in a gym bag or travel with it. But really, if it's something that sits at home or you go to the gym for, I would use the larger ones. You can just do more, as you'll see us demonstrate in a few minutes here. Tennis or lacrosse ball is a great tool to travel with or have in your bag or have at the office with you. Takes up no space, and it can really help you get into little trigger points that get caused from just a lot of repetitive posture like sitting. And get into trigger points that a foam roller can't, or that are really small and pinpoint. And again, if using something softer like a tennis or lacrosse ball, you can get through those points with a lot less discomfort until they're calmer. I also added on here, which is not on our previous foam rolling workshop, is the chirp. The chirp is like a wheel, and I'm going to show you how to use it. And it is much designed for the spine. It has a space in the middle for the spinous process, which is the center or the bony part of our spine that we feel down the middle. That is for, it gives us an indentation to literally set it on our spine, but not push right up onto the center of our spine. So it's a great tool to use at home for actual spinal movement. You're just not using it in much other areas of the body. So we will show you how to use that as well. So a couple different tools besides a foam roller that act and work the same way. So this is the first one that we covered in the last workshop. And this is our glute muscles, right? So you have 3 of them, as well as that piriformis muscle that sits right underneath them. So as you see on the left side of the diagram, the glute max is that big muscle in our backside. Underneath that, you see the minimus, or part of that minimus and medius, or higher up than that. And then underneath that big muscle, you see that piriformis muscle. Our sciatic nerve, that big nerve that leaves the low back, right there where that sacrum starts at the top center of the picture. If you can see where I'm mousing, right there where your low back or spine would meet your tailbone there between the hips. That nerve that exits there comes down both sides of our low back and passes through, either pierces for some people genetically, or passes underneath this piriformis muscle that's running basically diagonal or left to right here in the image. So it is deep below these glute muscles and that piriformis, which is why we give you so many of those hip and low back stretches to do, to address loosening things and relaxing things that run along that nervous system. And that sciatic nerve is what goes all the way down and branches off to things down and all into your legs and feet. So really important that when we're rolling this area, it's a big area and there's a lot of muscles there. We're going to do it in a way that breaks it up, and starting from the top of this iliac crest. So the top of the bone is where the fascia is attaching, and then rolling through the musculature out the side of the hips, or down to the side of the hip out to the leg. So I'm going to step away from the camera or the computer a second to get onto the floor and show you this one. So the picture of Doc there on the right of the diagram, her hands are on top of her hips. That is what our iliac crest is, that top bone that we feel when we set our hands on top of our hips. So we're going to roll from there and then go down into the buttock area. And then I'm going to also incorporate showing you how to roll the IT band, which is the side of our legs. It is the fascia, not any muscle. It's the fascia that's attaching the muscles on basically the back side of our legs and the front side of our legs. And that comes down the side and attaches then at the kind of notch of our knee. So you'll see me show you that in a minute. But we have to go that full length. That's that origin where Doc's hands are on top of her hips, all the way down to where the fascia ends at the tip of our knee. So that's for more of the, what you hear the IT band called, or that tensor fascia lata is what it is, its name is. And again, all fascia, so no muscle, but it's attaching all the muscles in our legs, front and back, on that side, and it goes all the way from our hip to our knee. So those are areas we're going to add to what you saw in the last workshop. Then I'm going to flip to a different picture. And this is where we're seeing, these are all of our erector spinae. So this is the muscles that are holding us, our spine in place and holding us upright. And there's 3 layers of them on the left and right side of the spine. So they are ones that you're going to see me roll along the spine up and down, as well as on the spine left and right of center. So I wanted you to see these, where these muscles attach. I know a lot of us are visual. I'm very visual. When I see where something is, then I can understand where I need to be and what I need to do. So we're going to roll lengthwise up and down and perpendicular to our spine to get all of these attachments. And a reason I love showing you this picture is look at how everything up top attaches to things in the shoulder blade. Everything attaching in that mid back attaches all the way down to our low back and the top of our hips and our tailbone. So this is why we talk about when there's things happening in our spine down low, we feel it up top, and we can work on things up top, and all of a sudden low back pain dissipates and goes away. It's because of all these connecting points and fascia layers, and how there's so much connecting. Like we learned as kids, the hip bone's connected to the knee bone, right? All of these things really do connect to each other and attach. And fascia is like that layer within them that does a lot of that connecting. So going back to here, I'm going to show you how to roll through this area of the hips and the glutes. Then we're going to roll into more of the side of the leg and down into things of the back of the leg. And then we're going to go to how to roll this area up and down of the spine and left and right of the spine. Okay. So hoping you can all see my picture. I'm not changing my screen any. So if you can see me, that's all that matters. So I'm going to now talk as loud as I can so that you guys hear me and go to the floor. So foam roller, I suggest for most purposes is this 4-inch diameter, 36-inch length, because you can do the most with it. If you are larger and need something wider, then get one that is 6-inch diameter like this. I would just suggest longer than this. This is very medium to very firm. And I'm going to demonstrate everything on this one. So in working this glute area, we're again going to start up top at our hips and work our way down. So I use my body weight on the foam roller when there's a bigger muscle belly. If it's tender, you're going to put more weight on your frame, like your legs or your arms. So I'm going to start on my right hip, more of my weight's here on my hands and my feet, and I'm just resting my hips down on it. So let me turn this way so that you can see that I'm going to start there at the very top of my hip, and I'm rolling to the side so that I'm at an angle, and then I'm rolling through it with more weight on my hands, the more tender it is, and going all the way to that sit bone. So when I'm sitting, that very bone underneath that we sit on is where you want to end. So I'm starting up here, and I'm rolling slowly at an angle through. And then you can just adjust your angle. So now I'm more in the center on the side of the tailbone, and then I'm going to switch sides, and I'm going to start up top here and roll through nice and slow till I get to that sit bone. And again, then more of my weight is sitting on the roller. Starting up top and rolling through. Now, it's really easy to then just roll your hamstrings. So sitting on it with your weight and just rolling all the way to your ankles and back and forth along the back of the legs. And I'm too close to our tables because I couldn't move them too far apart, but I would just roll the calves and all that fascia all the way down to your Achilles tendon, which is at your heel. So the way I would do the different muscle bellies of the legs is same thing. Start at your sit bone, start sitting on it, point your toes out, and then roll down all the way to your ankles. Then come back up, point the toes in, and then roll all the way down to the ankles. And you're going to get more of the inner thigh versus the outer thigh on the backside. So now going to this area here, right? So at the top of our hip, that IT band goes all the way down to here. So we're going to roll down the side of our leg, starting at the top, going to that notch on the knee right there. So I'm going to try to do this where you can see me. I just don't have as much space. I come down into what I call like a plank position, side lying. Again, my weight is on my arm and elbow and on my legs and my feet. So I bend one knee and put my foot down to brace myself, and I put this under my hip. And I'm at the very top of that hip crest right here. And then I just slowly roll and kind of army crawl all the way down till I get to that knee notch. And then I would turn over and switch sides. You're gonna find tender points in there because nobody works that fascia rarely ever. So it may feel really tender, just put more weight on your elbow or your upper body and just glide through it. Don't hang out on spots too long if it's not comfortable, and come back to it another day. And that will loosen up the more you do it. So then the last one we're gonna show for the spine is the one that is up with the picture. So the foam roller goes along the spine. When you have a long one, your head is here, your back is here, and your butt or your tailbone is at the other end. So there's not pressure in any one spot. So it really helps balance things out and doesn't feel uncomfortable. But again, this is all to someone's comfort. So if it's not comfortable, wait and do it once you have done more foam rolling or had more, adjustments and movement in the spine where this relaxes. But you're going to see me lay now along my spine, sitting on one end, coming down with my head onto the other end. So I'm not holding anything up, and my knees are always bent so that my back is nice and flat against the foam roller. And then you're going to literally roll to the right and to the left. And with the smaller one, you can do that. When those big 6-inch diameter ones, it's really hard to get this in between a shoulder blade if you're a smaller framed person. So you're going to roll left and right along all those postural muscles there in the picture. Then you can roll perpendicular. So then you can do gentle motion along the low back. With this one, we don't have a lot of extra tissue and muscle there. So I don't put much weight of the foam roller there. I just hold all my weight on my hands and I just lift up and roll from that low back down to the hips. Low back down to the hips. So I don't put much weight there on the foam roller. It doesn't need much. But when you get up into your upper back and mid back, you can put more weight on it. So that's where I'll lean right up against it and roll all the way up to my shoulders. And I just sort of lift my bottom off the floor and roll. And I would start up top and roll down. It's hard in this space to move myself always up and then back down and then go back to the top and come down. But that's how I would do it if I had a little bit more space and time. So rolling as high to the shoulders as you can. So then the last one we want to go over is this one. And this is targeting the upper neck muscles that are holding our head up, right? So if you have forward head posture, if you have any of that straightened curve in your spine, right, that we know from x-rays, any of that tension that headaches and migraines can come from. It's a lot of these little postural muscles that you see that are holding your head up. So they attach to the back of your skull, that ridge that we call the occipital ridge, which is this ridge right along the bottom of your skull, right above where the start of your neck is. And then they come down, as you can see, and cross over and come all the way down the center of the spine there on both sides. So that occipital ridge is that spot right on the back of the skull. The mastoid is where a lot of them attach. So that is that spot right behind the ear, that big knobby bone there. So that is where we're going to set the foam roller and roll. And it's a very short area through that neck, but it's going to be doing that ridge from the top of the skull down to the bottom of the neck. Come back up to the top and down to the bottom of the neck. So those pictures show where to start, where to end, and where all those little muscles attach on both the left and right side. So this is really key for letting a lot of that head weight go and a lot of that tension that we feel into our neck and shoulders. So I'll demonstrate that quickly, and then I want to show you one new one that is not on the old video before we wrap up. So for these, I can make sure you can see me, hopefully. I am again just going to start it there at the back of the skull. And I just really, it's a very short area. So I'm just like lifting up and rolling back and forth. It's harder to do with hair. But it's a short spot. So many times you're just holding at that ridge. So depending on how big your roller is, you may not actually roll. You may just rest it right on that mastoid or that occipital ridge, and just, I'll tend to turn left and turn right while I'm on the roller, like this. And that really hits that whole ridge instead of trying to roll through it. So hopefully not being right up to the camera, you could see that, but I just sit at that top ridge, and it's easier for me to turn left and turn right and get that ridge of muscles on both sides. So it's not really something I roll down because the foam roller is so big, but it is great for addressing the multitude of muscles that I'll attach there. The last one that we have not addressed on workshop that I want to show you is this is the pelvis and the front anatomy. Now you see that iliac crest, the top of the hips. You see those deeper muscles on the backside that come from the sacrum down to the hips and tailbone in this picture, and the ligaments that are attaching in those muscles. But you hear us talk about that psoas muscle all the time, the hip flexor. This is one that you can't reach a lot of this, but it is a very long muscle that is actually two muscles that make one. And it is this one there where they show the psoas major and the psoas minor. So they're termed the iliopsoas muscles, and they run from the front of your pelvic bone here, and they run right inside the hip bone here, that iliac crest. And then think about an upside down V. They dive midline towards your spine or towards your belly button. So it is a long muscle that, as you see there, attaches to all of your low back vertebra, all of the spinal bones in your low back, this muscle attaches to. So what it tends to do, this is the one when Doc and I have you bring your hands together over your head and see if your fingers line up, right? We're looking at different components that lead us to this muscle. If you sit, that is what this muscle does. It engages this muscle for you to bend the hip. That muscle cannot be reached with a foam roller all the way up, obviously, under the intestines and the pelvic and spinal ab muscles, but we can reach the lower probably third of it. So I want to just show you that for females rolling through there, it's a little easier. But rolling through the lower part of the psoas muscle can bring a lot of relief to the trigger points that are hanging out in those adhesions and along the ridges of the bone. So this is one that has to be practiced very delicately, but if you can do some stretching of the psoas and then and the front of the legs, and then rolling some of that, you're going to break up a lot of that fascia and adhesions. That is just where all of those things attach. Your adductors are also the muscles of the inner thigh, and all of this stuff comes and attaches in the front, basically at our pelvis or our groin area, and they get overlooked the most. And when this muscle attaches here, I'm gonna step away so you can see me, but then dives underneath all of this, when it stays tightened because we're bent at the hip, say from sitting all day, this is the muscle that when you go to stand up, you feel like an older person and like you can't stand up straight till you stretch out. And if you feel like you can't stand straight, you'll feel it here in your low back. It's usually coming from part of this muscle being too tight and not allowing you to straighten out or straighten up and stand up. So I'm going to briefly demonstrate before we close how I stretch or roll that very gently. Again, this is going to be different for those of us if you've never rolled this area. And for men, you obviously have to do this a different way, a little bit more with an open sort of like frog leg in order to roll the inner thigh and hit the corner of that psoas muscle here. So it's just one that we work on and stretch in here for you, but is a really good one to address with other stretches and possibly some foam rolling for the lower part of the hip, right along the inside of the hip bone, so that you can tackle some of those adhesions that just really rarely get worked. And this really brings a lot of more movement to your hips and your low back. So to wrap up, if I were doing this stretch again for as long as I've done it comfortably without pain, and when there's not any traumas or reasons not to roll through here, I again start higher and work my way down into my quad muscle, into my thigh. And I do that more of like in a push-up position. So I don't put all my weight onto the foam roller at first. I just gently do what I can and I add weight as it's comfortable. So I'll put my weight on my forearms and you'll see down at my feet, hopefully. And then I just set my body weight on it and roll back and forth. So I'm starting about at my belly button. And rolling forward. Crossing over the pelvis. And going down through my quads, through the front of the leg. And I would just stop before you get to the knee. So for some people, they would just do the legs. If you feel more comfortable that you can tackle rolling the front of the hip bone here and the front of the hip bone here, then I would say this may be a new one to talk about and try in using your roller. What I would say is, I don't have the chart here with me in front of me, but I mentioned it earlier in the presentation. So if you're looking for something to use and you try a foam roller and this is too intense, or doesn't feel comfortable yet, but you want to do movements along the spine, then talk to us and we can describe and show you what you can use as an alternative that's more comfortable along the spine itself. You won't be able to do a lot of the other movements for the other muscles with it, but if you're after something that's working the postural muscles up and down your spine from your shoulders down to your tailbone, that is something we can show you at that point and help you with. So I kind of want to open up and see if anybody has any questions. You can unmute yourself. That would be fantastic. Thank you for all being here and sharing in how to foam roll and different ways to foam roll. Hopefully this gives you some tips of things that you have not tried or maybe haven't done in that way yet. So for now, I'm going to pause recording